All right, in the interest of time, we are going to begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Organizational Psychology webinar series. This is Dr. Leila Naderi, Director of Partnership Development at Alliant International University. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And I truly hope that all of you and your loved ones are safe, healthy, and well. Our world is facing unusual challenges from the pandemic, racial injustice, political division, natural disasters, and more. All of this can stir up feelings of unease and unrest at the workplace, which often show up as a collapse in collaboration and productivity. So in today's webinar, our amazing speaker, Dr. Na, will provide a deep insights on how we can build a culture of collaboration and inclusiveness. Before I announce the agenda, I would like to inform you that we are recording this webinar, and I would like also to inform you that you can submit your questions via Q&A box on webinar window, and our speaker will respond to your questions after her talk. So for the agenda today, in the beginning, Dr. Nurjan Ansari, Professor of Organizational Psychology at Alliant International University, CSPP, will have a brief introduction to Alliant, CSPP, and Organizational Psychology program. She will introduce, after her talk, Dr. Yon Na, and Dr. Na is going to talk about transforming organizations, building a culture of collaboration and inclusiveness. And after her talk, we will have time for Q&A. And please feel free to submit your question during her talk, but we will respond after her presentation. And of course, at the end, we will wrap up the session with final notes and announcement. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Nurjan Ansari, Professor of Organizational Psychology at Alliant International University. Dr. Ansari.
Thank you very much, Leila. Welcome everyone to our webinar series organized by our Partnership Development team, our marketing team, and the Organizational Psychology Department. My name is Nurjan Ansari. I'm a professor in the Organizational Psychology Department in Los Angeles. I've been at Alliance since 2001, actually, teaching, engaging in research, and supervising doctoral dissertations. Before our talk today, let me give you a brief information about our university and our programs. Alliant International University is a private university. We are WASC accredited institution. We prepare future leaders for diverse fields, including psychology, business, education, forensic, and law. We deliver different types of programs on campus, online, hybrid, and we have 6 campuses in California, plus the online programs. Our mission at Alliant is to create and develop diverse and inclusive work environments empowered by our successful alumni. Let me tell you a little bit about organizational psychology. My program offers both master's and doctoral degrees in organizational psychology. We have both online and on-campus master's degrees. And we focus mainly on how people behave at work. Applying best practices in psychology, organizational psychologists help boost fairness in the workplace, problem solving, and productivity. They facilitate healthy communication and cooperation between employees and managers so that organizations can function much better and the way it should. Industrial organizational psychologists work in a variety of fields and industries. You can think of IT, healthcare, biotech, or consulting firms. By the way, IO psychology has been identified as the fastest growing industry in the United States by the Department of Labor and Bureau last year and the year before. So it's a growing industry. There are 30% more jobs expected by 2021 in our field. IO psychologist jobs include a variety of different functions, implementing trainee programs, evaluating their effectiveness, coaching leaders to develop their skills and talents, optimizing the quality of work life, motivating employees, creating diverse and inclusive work environments, implementing effective organizational changes, and developing criteria to evaluate performance. It's a very exciting field, and I would be happy to give you more information about our field and the career opportunities. If you wish so, please contact me via email. I now proudly present our speaker, our alumna, Dr.Yon. She is a leadership and organizational effectiveness consultant. She is also one of our popular part-time instructors in our program. Previously, she was the org development director at Warner and senior manager of org capability at New York Times. And her talk today is very timely. It's titled as Transforming Organizations, Building a Culture of Collaboration and Inclusiveness. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Na.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ansari, and thank you, Dr. Naderi, for pulling this together. And I'm thankful that everyone is on this call, despite it being lunchtime for some, maybe sleeping time for others. So thank you all for joining. And I just wanted to quickly introduce myself in my own words. And I think that Dr. Ansari pulled together a great bio description of what I do. I help organizations to become more effective through their leadership, through their teams, through individual coaching. So that's one side of the work that I do. The other side, which is around sort of the passion area, it's around helping Asian women to advance in the workplace. So that's the kind of the other path that I have in my career. So it's both organization effectiveness and then helping advance Asian women at the workplace. And sometimes they go hand in hand, sometimes not. At the end of it all, it's around creating collaborative, inclusive environments where people work together effectively so that they can achieve business outcomes. So the topic today is around transforming organizations, and I'll present some ideas to you, some challenges, some ways to achieve success in organizations despite all that's going on. At the end of about 20 minutes or so, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So that's how this will be structured. And one thing I'll say is before we get into the topic itself, just take the moment to sit, reflect on this time. And this is really time for you. Hopefully time for you to think about this topic in a way that's going to resonate for you. I think many of us, because we're high performers, high achievers, busy individuals, we spend a lot of time with racing thoughts. This is just a moment for you to just sit and reflect and think, and then interact by asking questions. Here's some stats for you. And this is stats, these are stats from the Pew Research Organization. And the reason why I bring this up is not to alarm you. However, I think it's important to set the context as far as what's happening in the world, in society, in organizations. So 33% of Americans experience high levels of psychological distress during the coronavirus outbreak. And so this survey was conducted back in May of this year. Be interesting to see where we are now, so many months into the pandemic. The second statistic, 52% of young adults ages 18 to 29 lived with one or both of their parents due to the outbreak. And this statistic is from the month of July. And much of that was due to campuses closing down and going remote, them having, students having to leave the dorms. Other instances were due to financial constraints, people losing jobs, and so they couldn't pay rent, so they had to go back home. The last bullet is around the pandemic plus the racial kind of tensions that are existing in society today. 39% of Asian Americans and 38% of Black Americans reported that they've observed others feeling uncomfortable around them because of their race or ethnicity since the beginning of the outbreak. And the reason why I bring this up is because, again, it sets the context for all that is going on in the world at home, in our organizations. And so, with that said, how do you continue to work in an environment where you're going to be remote for the most part, unless you're an essential worker, you're likely in a remote environment? How do you ensure that you are being collaborative and that you're inclusive as you work together? So there are a couple of things that I'll be talking, or a few things I'll be talking about. Some of the challenges associated with building a culture of collaboration and inclusiveness during times of upheaval and change. If you've studied culture, if you've managed culture, if you've talked about culture, if you've experienced culture, you know that culture is one of those topics that are very important and also elusive. So how do you encourage a sense of collaboration and inclusiveness that will help your culture in your organization during this time of change? The other piece I'll mention to you is the sort of the examples around companies adapting to what's happening in society, what's happening with racial tensions, what's happening with the pandemic. So just some examples of how companies have been able to adapt. And then the other piece is around recommendations for leaders planning for the human aspect of 2021 and beyond. As Dr. Ansari said, organizational psychologists focus on the human side of organizations, meaning how do we ensure that organizations are productive and effective through their employees, through their leaders, through team dynamics. So there's some examples or recommendations that I have put together for you. And then lastly, some skills that are required for individuals so that you can succeed in this environment and be collaborative as much as possible. And what you do now will transition into when we do go back to the offices at some point. Okay. So what are some of the challenges? Why is it not easy for organizational leaders as well as employees to encourage and support this culture of collaboration and inclusiveness? Here are just some examples of challenges that organizations are faced with, whether you are a nonprofit, not-for-profit, or for-profit organization, or in higher ed. You know, there are end of the year business outcomes and revenue expectations, or some sort of goal or objective that the organization needs to meet. There's also planning for next year, 2021, strategic planning that's probably in the works now, if you are in a calendar year. There's also, if you are a manager, if you are an organization that employs employees, there are performance management and feedback discussions that need to be had regardless of what's happening. And this is very difficult to do in a virtual setting. So how do you ensure that you are delivering feedback and managing performance in a productive way? These are some of just, I'm sure if you thought about what other challenges there might be, there are probably a ton more. So these are just 3 that I came up with. Think about all the challenges you might be faced with, and maybe we could talk about that later at the Q&A. So what are some of the ways that you can overcome these challenges of creating this collaborative and inclusive environment? This sounds really easy, finding ways to make human connections in a remote world, but it's really difficult to do for a variety of reasons. So I have just a few tips for you. So oftentimes, depending on if you are more of a social person, you know, you might even say if you're introverted or extroverted, or a little bit of both, you might miss the kind of the collaborative efforts that happen when you walk down the hall to speak to someone, when you pick up the phone in your office to call someone that's on another floor, or you meet someone for coffee. All those interaction points are now gone. So what I encourage you to do is replicate the immediacy of walking down the hall to speak to a boss or colleague by using technology, but not setting up a Zoom call because we can only do so many Zoom calls per day. What about text, if that's okay? What about using things like Slack? What about using IM, instant message? Maybe even picking up the phone. I think that's the one thing that we forget to do. I did a session with a group of college students a while back, and I said, how do you collaborate? What are some of the ways that you collaborate? And they mentioned Slack, they mentioned Microsoft Teams, different kind of technological platforms. And when I said, what about the phone? They kind of cringed. And so the art of using the phone, I think that's been lost, but this is something that you can use. And don't forget that, because that piece, the introvert in some of us who might not want to be in front of a Zoom screen all of the time, this could really help with us feeling like, okay, I can still interact and I can still collaborate, but I can do it in a way that's comfortable for me. So picking up the phone and picking up the phone and making a phone call, I think is a really great way of doing that. Establishing no Zoom meetings from time to time. Going back to the kind of the old idea of having a conference call. I know that's not ideal, but sometimes that's what people need, especially during the afternoon times when energy levels tend to dip. You don't want to feel like you have to be on in front of a camera. So rather than having a Zoom setting with your cameras off, you can do a conference call, again, using that phone, have a conference call with your staff or your team and minimize some of the energy dips that could happen because you're having to feel like you're on the camera all the time and therefore on as a personality. The other piece is around using check-in questions at the start of a meeting. And this could be done one-on-one, it can be done in a team setting. Typically the person who calls the meeting can think of ways to interact and connect with your colleagues in a real way by asking a few check-in questions. What are check-in questions? They're essentially checking in to see how someone's doing. And it's not just this plain, hey, how are you? And then they say fine, and you end it there. Check-in questions are a little bit more in depth. It could be something like, what are some ways that you've been able to take care of yourself this week? What is one thing you feel most accomplished about this week? What is the most pressing issue you're confronted with? How can we help you? And so I wouldn't go into a staff meeting and just blurt out these questions. I would put this into your repertoire over time. So maybe experiment with a colleague one-on-one to see how this works, and then experiment with your team to see how it works in a broader setting. But check-in questions are really important just to see where everyone is. One big question that you could ask, especially after the vice president debates or any kind of big political event that happens, how have the recent events reported by the news affected you? And just see, without any judgment, what the response is. And the follow-up question could be, how can we help you, or what resource do you need? Okay, so check-in questions are really great and powerful to have that real connection in a remote world. I'm going to shift to, and this relates to what I was just talking about in terms of some of the recent events happening in the world and how it's affecting employees. Here are some examples of companies adapting to both COVID-19 and racial tensions. There are two things that are going on. Companies are learning and adapting and continuing with their business. By that, I mean, it could be that they're having to restructure their organizations. There's a lot of that going on. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're laying off employees. In some cases, you're furloughing employees and bringing them back when the work picks up again. In other situations, you may be laying off employees, but it's really about looking at the long term instead of looking at just the short term and seeing what needs to be done. It may, as a leader in an organization, it might be easy to just think, okay, let me just cap off the kind of the expenses aspect of this organization, but that will do more harm. And so in the long run, so if there is a way to find creative ways, maybe people go to part-time on a very short-term basis and then go back to full-time. So learning and adapting to what's happening from an external standpoint and the business pressures that you might have, and seeing what works and tweaking as you go along is more powerful than making this grand change and then you're left with deflated morale. You're left with people feeling experiencing survivor guilt because they've lost their colleagues due to the restructure or the reorganization, and then that will have an effect, another negative effect on employee engagement. So thinking about different ways that might work for you as an organizational leader or as an employee to figure out what's going to be best for your company, your organization, that's the recommendation. So with that said, you can't make assumptions about what's going to be the right thing from an employee standpoint. So many of the organizations that I've been working with, they hold, it could be called a listening tour, it could be called a listening circle, it can be just informal group dialogue sessions to talk about one topic and have it facilitated by someone who can facilitate the discussion, whether it's the leader or someone from HR or an external party to come in. But the point is to listen to your employees and not make assumptions about what's needed during this time. You can have your own, as a leader, you can have your own perspective on how to address a situation within the environment, but without the data collection from the employee base, you'll miss out on a valuable piece of information that could help inform your decisions. So with that said, we're transitioning to, as leaders, planning for the human aspect of organizations in 2021 and beyond. Thinking about inclusion, you know, we think about there's diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's a topic these days, and rightly so. Inclusion does include different perspectives, regardless of your background. So it's broadening perspectives from not just from the typical diversity sense, but also from different levels in the organization too, to gather insights that could help inform how you're going to best lead the organization. So data gathering, and as organizational psychology practitioners and org change practitioners, this is an aspect of the work that we do that's really important, in that you have to gather data in order to inform your next steps. You can't go with your gut feeling, because that doesn't work. You're not getting the broad perspective that you need to make decisions. So even with a situation with returning back to the office, don't assume that your employees will be ready and willing to go back to the office. That may not be the case. It may be that employees, because in some cases, maybe employees, because they're having to balance both work and life in this setting here, that they're eager to go to the office and get a break from having to be around their kids or their family or their parents, like in the situation, in the statistic that I showed you earlier. Returning back to the office could mean different things for different people. So try to understand what that means for your employee population, and even for yourself as leaders, to better understand how to phase in this process. And that's the whole point. You don't just turn the switch and everyone goes back. You have to understand what's going to work for individuals and try to customize a solution that's going to be effective for them. Easing and minimizing the anxiety about returning back to the office or to the workplace for employees, particularly those who live in mixed households, as I mentioned, with the 18 to 29-year-olds. If you're in a household where you have family members who are older or at risk to COVID, you as a leader in the organization, you need to make sure that you consider that. And so that's where the inclusive perspective comes in. Consider that there are a diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and needs that are out there. So tapping into the data collection aspect is really important. Here's another piece. employees may have been impacted by someone, whether they knew the person or not. It may have been someone they knew about, or someone in their own family or in their circle of people they are interacting with. They may have lost them due to COVID. And so think about that from a kind of a employee returning back to the workplace and feeling less than secure about going back to the workplace. Maybe they don't want to share that piece of news because maybe there'll be a stigma against them. I've had conversations with Asian Americans who were during kind of the rise of the hate crimes around toward Asian Americans. I've had conversations where, you know, we were feeling apprehensive about returning to the workplace because there may have been some stereotypical or discriminatory remarks aimed at us, or there could be as we go back. Black Americans, with the BLM kind of resurgence that occurred recently, Black Americans feeling like, okay, how do I be me in the workplace? And what is my organization doing to help support me during this time? So these are all of the complexities that employees, individuals, people are experiencing. So be mindful of that. Recommendations continued. So as I was talking about, you know, you have to learn about what will help your employees to be most engaged, feel safe, less anxious as they return back to the office, or even now. Start now. Determining which jobs can be conducted remotely in the long term, that's another piece that you'll need to consider. I mean, there have been a number of technology organizations like Google and Facebook who announced that don't worry until, and Apple too, don't worry. You'll be working either through July remotely or indefinitely in some cases. So do an analysis of what jobs can be conducted remotely and see how that could factor into your planning for next year. And in the meantime, you can even enhance collaboration by holding periodic in-person team meetings in an open air setting, following city guidelines. I held an executive offsite this morning virtually. I was the only virtual person, but all of the executives were in person wearing masks. And they really craved the interactions with each other. So they needed to be in person in order for them to feel the sense of collaboration. So depending on the team, you might want to consider that. Executive leaders, such as the ones at the C-suite level, holding frequent virtual town halls during this time is really important. And as you gear up for returning back to the office, and I would recommend more frequent ones versus longer ones, meaning have 30-minute town halls where you're describing what's going on with the business, creating transparency and all of that, providing good data and information. But at the same time, do it on a regular basis. So maybe once a week or every other week. Employees feel very much of a disconnect between the C-suite and the kind of the front, at the ground level employees. They feel a big disconnect to their leadership right now. So make sure that you bridge that gap by at least having these town halls on a regular basis. And then with that said, the managing performance and developing employees, don't forget about that. That's at the end of this year. So don't forget about this piece. And think about if collaboration and inclusion, those concepts are something that you might want to consider moving forward and incorporating that into how you're assessing employees and managers and leaders too. Revisit the ways in which you're managing performance. This is an important piece. Things are shifting and they'll continue to shift. Things shift every day almost, it seems. So how do you adapt as an organization in terms of managing performance so that you're making sure that you're getting what you need? If you are a business leader managing an organization full of employees that need to create an output, how do you make sure that you are getting the best productivity and engagement? All of these things are important. Making sure that people are held accountable to collaborative behaviors, inclusive behaviors, those are important too. You need to be able to measure that and also be able to speak to these behaviors. Lastly, what I wanted to talk about 4 things around individual skills required for greater success in collaborative environments. This goes to all levels, leaders to employee levels. Get clear with colleagues and key stakeholders, meaning it's really important for you to, whatever the message is, it's important for you to be as clear as possible, because in this remote setting, in this text-based setting, it's very easy to make a mistake and not be able to retract it, right? Because it's out there, it's, you know, in the text visually, it's very hard to retract it. So with that said, be very clear about and intentional about the messages that you're sending out. You don't have the opportunity to go down the hall and say, hey, I sent that email to you, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it that way. You don't even know what the reaction was, because it goes out and that's it. So be very clear about messaging. Shift the focus to someone else. This goes back to the human aspect of organizations. We're so used to talking about ourselves. How about changing that focus, that lens, and asking others how they're doing, using those check-in questions, finding out if you could help with a project that someone is struggling with. Shift the focus to someone else for the time being and see how that works. This building relationships by sharing knowledge. I love the idea of people sharing articles, forwarding resources and things like that. That's great. And I think the more powerful way of doing this is to say, hey, I know we talked about this particular topic, and I read this article and I was thinking about you. And that just that simple interaction, the simple message saying that I was listening and I'm thinking about you, it goes a long way. So build relationships by sharing knowledge, share tips, share quick articles, make sure you read them so that it resonates with the person you're sending it to. And then being responsible. Before logging out of these virtual meetings, it's really important for all of you to be clear about what the takeaways are. Because, you know, you ask 5 people in a meeting what they are taking away, and this is in the real world too, not in a virtual setting, and 5 different answers will come up. So at every single meeting before logging out, make sure that you're clear about what action items are required and next steps. Make sure that those are identified and assigned. And then spend a few minutes at the end of each meeting to reinforce what actions you yourself are going to be responsible for. And if you're confused and you step away from that meeting and you say, you know what, I didn't actually understand that, go back and get that clarity that you need that we just talked about. So with that said, there's a lot of information and this will be recorded. It is recorded, so you can go back to it. And I just wanted to end here because I want to make sure that we leave enough time for questions.
Well, thank you, Dr. Na. That was a really good reminder for all of us. Especially, I loved when you highlighted, those qualities that we need for human connection, especially in this virtual remote world that we are all experiencing. So at this time, we want to create a space for those participants that they have questions. Until we have any question, I want to ask Dr. Ansari, do you have any comments or questions so far? And then I have a question also I would like to ask Dr. Na as well.
This was very informative. It's very timely. They're really good tips. Thank you very much, Jan, for your presentation. Now, I am experiencing and observing that work-life balance became really difficult to maintain, especially for working moms who have young children at home. And sometimes there are multiple people working or studying at home at the same time. But when moms, even though they work, are at home, expectations are different. And some of those moms actually have to study with the young children to make sure that they actually sit in front of the Zoom. So what advices do you have for remotely working moms who have young children at home?
Yeah, and so many of my colleagues experience that too. And the piece is around the transparency and also accountability, meaning having the conversation with your manager about, this is my situation and this is what I need. and how can we kind of renegotiate how we'll work together? Maybe you draw boundaries in terms of, and one of my colleagues, what they do is make sure that at 5:30 p.m. that they don't respond to emails, and the manager is aware of that. And that's a simple boundary that they're creating for themselves, but it goes a long ways because I think especially in this setting, we feel more compelled to react to emails right away. Even if it's 10 p.m. at night, we feel compelled to do it. So the key piece is to identify what you need, what the situation is for you, and then have that conversation with your manager and say, this is what we need to do for this time being. And this is exactly what I need from you. And how can you support me in this? And so for managers to be open about that too, everyone, I talked about this in another setting with employees, and it could be that someone came to a Zoom meeting and they had just had a fight with their partner, or they were just yelling at their kids about something, or something just happened. There's no kind of barrier anymore. You can't just leave the house and you go to the office and, yes, you're thinking about it, but you're bringing that all into this setting. So it's really important for others to be empathetic to what your situation is. And it's up to both of you, meaning the manager and the employee, to set that sort of contract in terms of what the outcomes are going to be. And it will shift over time.
Yes.
You may have different needs.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I really loved actually what you mentioned about some of those checking questions, Dr. Na, in terms of it's just because as you highlight right now, there's no boundary between work and just the regular family life. It's just it's important sometimes to create that space of allowing our colleagues and friends to come to the space and also just really authentically to listen to them. So thank you for sharing those questions, really deep questions. That is important sometimes during a really professional meeting. We just begin with that. Really good suggestions. I really appreciate it. And I see a good question also, one of our participants asking, as a leader, how do you manage team feedback and dynamics during this social movement, especially in a case where your team has views on both sides of the spectrum? Really good question.
And it's around team feedback, meaning team feedback and dynamics, especially in a case where your team has views on both sides of. So is the feedback related to performance? Is the feedback related to where the company stands on BLM or any other social movement? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, that's a topic that comes up a lot with companies, and you've probably seen back in May, June or so, many organizations came out with their stance about BLM and racial equity and all of those important topics. So I think some organizations jumped the gun a little bit because they didn't look internally to see if their organization actually supports what they're saying. Meaning there was lack of diversity at their leadership levels for some companies, and they talked about racial equity, and they talked about inclusion and diversity. So you have to be really careful as an organization where what it looks like from a diversity standpoint and where you are going as an organization before you take a stance on a particular topic. That's my opinion, and that's my recommendation, because I think we jump to here's what every other company is doing, so let me put out a statement about it. You have to come together as an organization and create what that statement is. You can't leave it to senior leadership to do it. You can't leave it to employees to do it. It's the entire organization coming together to understand it and define. So BLM, what is our stance on it? How are we going to support BLM? Or any other important racial topic. There are companies that have provided resources to support communities or organizations that support BLM, and that's one way. But again, that's just scratching the surface. You need to come together as an organization to understand what is our stance, and how do we make sure that we support this cause in a way that's going to resonate with the entire organization, in a way that's going to be be truthful. I think that's the big piece, and not a PR stunt.
Wonderful. I wanted to just like,
There is another question,
yeah.
Layla.
So I can see that is asking.
This is a question the participant says, kind of off topic. Do you think there's still a bamboo ceiling?
Well, the bamboo ceiling has to do with perceptions that others have of Asian Americans at the workplace, and that Asian Americans do not exhibit the leadership qualities that are typically in the workplace. So this has to do with perceptions, and there's been a lot of work since Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling, the book came out. There's been a lot of work and conversations around this topic. This topic in particular is of special interest to me because I've done many studies on Asian American executives, Asian American women in leadership. And so yes and no, in that there are a small subset of executives who are from an Asian background who have been able to achieve success in corporations and also across multiple sectors. And there's still more work to be done, but it's not, part of it is lack of representation at a broader level that helps to get this group up to the next. So for example, VP level, there aren't enough Asian Americans. So then at the director level, there aren't enough Americans. And then at the manager level, there may not be enough Asian Americans. So that has an effect on who gets to the top if you're thinking about executive levels. So there's a lack, the pool isn't there right now, but we're working on it. And so it's yes and no. I think that would be my honest answer. It's yes and no. But there are very deliberate attempts within organizations like Toyota, Target, number of these organizations that focus on developing Asian American leaders.
Wonderful. And I see, due to interest of time, I will read this final question. Maybe we have 1 minute also to respond to that. It seems a long question, but I think it's a good question. Okay. So hello, Yon. I think you hit the nail on the head with companies not necessarily looking internally at their own employees' feelings before making broad statements about political popular topics. While I understand why companies make statements on this topic and feel grateful they do, I also balance that with wondering why we have moved into this place culturally where we expect our internal company culture to reflect our external views, or expect our company to make statements about everything and anything. What do you think about this dynamic? And this is our final question.
Okay, that's a very good question and very complex question. And the best way to answer that is, so September 11th, when September 11th happened, there wasn't social media. And so, so you experienced 9/11, you saw it on the images on the news, and it's kind of ended there. So imagine if social media were in existence back then, you would continue to see, and there would be reinforcements of the images that occurred. And so that could have even more of a negative effect on people because you're bombarded with the images, right? So the reason why I bring that up is, part of this is the pressure that organizations and leaders have or feel because of social media and because of the consistent messaging that's always there. So you almost don't have this opportunity to process what you want to do as a leader, as far as how you want to take a stance on these important topics. So that's why, going to the employee base to understand what it is, instead of looking at what other companies are doing on LinkedIn when you see all those posts, or on other social media outlets, that's distracting. So those are distractions right now. The important piece is understanding and hearing from your employees about what is important in terms of the culture and important political, social matters, whatever the case may be. Having that baseline understanding is really important, rather than being bombarded by all of the images that we're seeing on a regular basis and feeling like, okay, it's, you know, that whole fear of missing out. You know, you've heard that, right? You've probably experienced it in your own lives due to social media. I love social media, and at the same time, I feel like it's a detriment to how we think about important topics and how we respond. So that's the, like, thinking and responding, that's the piece that gets convoluted because of social media. And I think, you know, Kaylin, I hope that I answered that question okay for you. There's probably more discussion that could be had on this particular topic.
Yes, absolutely. It's just like, thank you so much for, for sharing your wisdom. Actually, I think I see some more questions, but also due to the interest of time, we want to be mindful to everyone's time. At this time, I really want to appreciate Dr. Na for sharing your wisdom with us, and also your deep knowledge and experience about the field. Any final comments, you and Dr. Ansari also, I also request you also if you have any final comments, and then I will wrap up the session with final notes.
I just wanted to say thank you to both of you, and also Alliant for inviting me to speak today on this important topic, and then for everyone who participated as well. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but I love having virtual coffee talks. So please feel free to reach out to me, and then we can discuss further. So if I didn't answer your questions, or if you have a thought, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or via my email.
Thank you very much, Jan. This was a wonderful forum to discuss. I see that the remaining of the questions are mostly about inclusion strategies and what to do with respect to COVID plus, race plus, gender plus other tensions that we experience in the workplaces. Maybe we'll try to organize another event that focuses mainly on the strategies around inclusiveness.
Absolutely.
Try to do that.
Yeah.
I want to say that, we will continue with the organizational psychology webinar series, and also based on the interest and also the feedback, we definitely provide the next topics based on, what's needed actually, and what's demanded, and also what, we need to know more actually. So thank you, both of you. Just, I really appreciate the time, Dr. Na and Dr. Ansari, for, coming to this session, creating this space. And for the final note, I just wanted to just share a couple of announcements before we wrap up this session. So if you enjoyed this webinar as much as I did, actually, my also background is more leadership development, and also I love the organizational aspect of my studies as well. It's just like, so we will continue with the organizational psychology webinar series. So please stay tuned. You can visit events.alliant.edu, and we post all of our events and also complimentary educational webinars that we invite thought leaders and experts such as Dr. Na, Dr. Ansar. They come and they actually share their insights with our community. So please stay tuned, and we will inform you about the next organizational psychology webinar series. For those of you who have expressed interest about our organizational psychology program also, I wanted to mention that we have a CSPP virtual open house on October 14th at 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. Pacific time. So again, when you go to events.alliant.edu, so feel free to register. And if you have any questions, our admission counselors will be more than happy to assist you to know how you can take your journey for your graduate programs. And with that being said, also I wanted to say that, as Dr. Ansari mentioned, this webinar has brought to you, by effort of a team. Of course, we truly appreciate, our program directors, faculty member of organizational psychology program, Dr. Na, our speaker. We are so proud of our alumni, that the positive impacts they make, and also it's a team effort. So I have added also partnership development team contact information here. This is the effort also that we as a team put together to make sure that we are providing educational opportunities for our community based on what we see that there is a need that we need to create a space and to get to know more. So feel if you have expressed interest about our program, you could reach out to any of my team members, Ria Johnson, Joel Calzada, or myself, and we would be more than happy to help you either about our programs or partnership opportunities with your organizations. So with that being said, thank you so much for creating this space for us. Thank you. Thanks to each and every one of you for your amazing questions you ask, and also creating this space to learn from each other. And also, I want to say special thanks to Dr. Now because of her wonderful presentation. And also, now you have also her contact information. Please feel free to reach out to her for additional questions or comments. Of course, Dr. Ansari, the professor of organizational psychology at Alliant, she shared her information, contact information. So, and also we will invite each and every one of you to join our next organizational psychology webinar. Until then, please stay well, stay healthy, and we hope that we see you for our next webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.